What if I told you that the most important move the Kansas City Chiefs make this entire offseason has nothing to do with the trade, nothing to do with the draft, and everything to do with a wide receiver who the rest of the NFL basically forgot about? Yeah, we need to talk about Jauan Jennings right now, because something is happening, something quiet, something slow building, and by the time most people catch on, it's going to be too late. Let me paint you a picture. It's March 2026. NFL free agency has just blown through like a hurricane. Big contracts flying everywhere, quarterbacks getting traded, running backs getting paid. The whole league just went absolutely chaotic for about 4 days straight. And then it stopped. The dust settled, the confetti dropped, the press conferences ended. And when the smoke finally cleared, everyone looked around and realized, wait, there's still a guy out there. A really good guy. A guy who by every single logical measure should have been signed weeks ago. Jauan Jennings is still sitting there, on the open market, unsigned, available. And the Kansas City Chiefs, they're still sitting there too, needing exactly what he brings. You don't believe me? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to completely understand why this move isn't just a possibility. It might actually be inevitable. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, because to understand why this matters so much right now, you have to understand where this man came from. Chapter 1. The kid nobody wanted. The year is 2020. The NFL draft is happening. 7 rounds, hundreds of players, hundreds of hopes and dreams getting either validated or crushed in real time on national television. Round 1 goes by, no Jauan Jennings. Round 2, round 3, round 4, still no Jauan Jennings. 5, 6, nothing. And then in the 7th round, the very last round of the entire draft, the round where teams are basically just throwing darts at a board and hoping something sticks, the San Francisco 49ers call his name. Pick 217. That's where Jauan Jennings entered the NFL. Think about that. Pick 217. You know how many players get selected before pick 217? 216 of them. 216 players that every single team in the league decided they wanted more than Jauan Jennings. That's not just being overlooked, that's being buried. Now, to be fair, Jennings came in with real questions around him. He was a big, physical receiver out of Tennessee, 6'3", 212 pounds, the kind of frame that scouts salinate over. But there were injury concerns. There were questions about his route running. There were whispers that maybe he wasn't fast enough to separate at the NFL level. So they took him in the 7th round, handed him a tryout disguised as a contract, and basically said, prove it. And in year 1, he didn't play a single regular season game, not one. He sat, he watched, he learned. Most guys in that position pack their bags and go home. Most guys in that position quietly disappear from the league and end up on a couch somewhere watching the games they used to dream about playing in. Jauan Jennings stayed. And what happened next is one of the best stories in recent NFL history that nobody ever tells properly. Chapter 2. The rise that nobody expected. It didn't happen overnight. That's not how real stories work. Real stories are slow. Real stories are grinding and ugly and invisible to everyone watching from the outside. Jennings spent years developing in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan's system, one of the most complex and demanding offensive systems in all of professional football, slowly, patiently, brutally shaped him into something different, something harder, something better. By 2024, something clicked. Jauan Jennings went out there and caught 77 passes. 77 for 795 yards, 6 touchdowns. For a team that had Deebo Samuel, that had Brandon Ayuk, that had George Kittle, all demanding targets, all eating up opportunities, Jennings still managed to put up those kinds of numbers. Let that sink in for a second. In one of the most crowded receiving rooms in the entire NFL, the 7th round pick carved out a legitimate role and thrived. And it wasn't just about the stats, it was about how he did it. Jennings became the guy the 49ers turned to in the moments that mattered most. Third downs, red zone situations, contested catches with defenders draped all over him. The kind of plays where most receivers find a reason to go out of bounds early or run a route that keeps them safe. Jennings ran straight into the fire, every single time. In 2025, the season got harder. He was playing through broken ribs. Broken ribs. Not a sore shoulder, not a tweaked hamstring. Broken ribs. The kind of injury that makes just breathing a painful experience, let alone running routes at full speed and taking hits from 300-pound defensive linemen. And he still went out there. He still caught 55 passes for 643 yards. He still led the entire San Francisco 49ers in receiving touchdowns with 9. The guy was playing hurt on a team that was falling apart around him in a season that most people wrote off completely, and he still found the end zone 9 times. Over the last 2 seasons combined, you know who he's tied with in receiving touchdowns for the 49ers? George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the history of the sport. Jennings is tied with George Kittle. But here's the crazy part, the part that makes this story weird, the part that sets up everything we're about to talk about. Even after all of that, even after the broken ribs, the 700-plus yards, the 9 touchdowns, the clutch catches, the elite blocking, the everything, Jauan Jennings entered free agency in March of 2026, and the phone just didn't ring. Not the way it was supposed to. Chapter 4. The Market That Never Came. Here's what everybody expected going into this offseason. Jennings hits free agency, teams line up, somebody offers him $20-something million a year, he signs, he goes somewhere and becomes a legitimate number 1 or number 2 receiver for the first time in his career. That was the narrative. That was supposed to be his moment. Instead, the opposite happened. Free agency opened, the big receivers, the guys at the very top of the market, got scooped up immediately. That happens every year. The best players go first and they go fast, but Jennings was supposed to be right behind them. Spot Track projected his next contract at 3 years, $67 million, an average of $22.6 million per year. That number put him firmly in the tier of legitimate, well-compensated NFL starters. But nobody offered him that. A few teams called: the Cleveland Browns, the Washington Commanders, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Tennessee Titans, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Interest existed. The interest was real. But the offers, the real significant "this is what you're worth" offers, they never came. And now we're weeks into free agency. The calendar is moving. March is almost gone, and Jauan Jennings, the number 5 overall free agent according to USA Today, the number 1 available wide receiver left on the entire market, is still sitting there, unsigned. And right about now is when this whole story takes a turn, because the longer this drags on, the balance of power shifts. The player who was supposed to command a massive multi-year deal is now in a position where he might have to take something smaller, something shorter, something that keeps the door open for another run at the big money next year. And the team that couldn't afford him 3 weeks ago, suddenly they might be the perfect fit. Let's go back to Kansas City for a minute, because the Chiefs are in a genuinely fascinating situation right now. Most people aren't fully appreciating. On one hand, they're the Kansas City Chiefs. They just came off back-to-back Super Bowl windows. They have Patrick Mahomes under center. They re-signed Travis Kelce to a 3-year deal worth up to $57 million. They went out and signed Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl MVP running back, to add a legitimate ground threat that this offense has desperately needed. The dynasty is not over. The window is not closed. This team is still very much a contender. But on the other hand, they've got real holes, significant holes, holes that if they don't address them properly could absolutely cost them in a playoff run. Think about what they lost this offseason alone. Trent McDuffie, gone. One of the best young cornerbacks in the league, shipped to the Los Angeles Rams. Jalen Watson, gone, also to the Rams in a trade. Brian Cook, gone, off to Cincinnati.
Leo Chenal, gone. Charles Omenihu, gone. Derek Nottie, gone. The defensive side of the ball took a serious hit this offseason. The Chiefs' defense that strangled opponents for years and years and years is being rebuilt almost from the ground up. And offensively, it's complicated. Rashee Rice had a disappointing 2025. Xavier Worthy, the guy who was supposed to be the next big thing at receiver, hasn't broken out the way everyone expected. Juju Smith-Schuster is gone. Marquise Brown is gone. The receiving depth that Kansas City needs to keep defenses honest behind Mahomes simply does not exist right now the way it needs to. They kept Tyquan Thornton, the deep ball specialist. They have Jalen Royals, who's unproven. And then there's a whole lot of question marks after that. So here's the question that Brett Veach, the general manager, is sitting with every single morning when he wakes up. How do I add a meaningful receiver without blowing up the cap? The Chiefs have about $7 million in available cap space right now. You can't sign a $22 million a year guy with $7 million in cap space. The math just doesn't work. But, and here's where this gets really interesting, what if the guy doesn't need $22 million a year anymore? What if the market has moved? What if the negotiating position has shifted completely? That's exactly what's happening right now. Chapter 5, The Perfect Storm. Let me show you how all of this is converging at exactly the same moment. Jennings wanted a big multi-year deal. He wanted the validation. He wanted the money that his production deserved. And honestly, he deserved it. He earned every dollar of a big contract based on what he did in San Francisco. But the NFL doesn't care about what you deserve. The NFL is a business, and right now, the business has decided that Jennings doesn't have the leverage he thought he had. Here's why. Partially, it's the injury history. The torn ACL and LCL he suffered in December 2025. That's the kind of thing that scares teams off of long-term commitments. Teams are willing to pay for proven health. They're willing to take risks on guys who have been durable and consistent. The moment you have a serious knee injury in your recent medical history, every team's front office starts asking questions. And partially, honestly, it's just the way free agency works. The early window belongs to the teams and players who move fast. The longer you wait, the more options close, the more leverage disappears. Jennings was waiting for the perfect offer, and the perfect offer never came. Now he's past the peak of his bargaining power. Which means, and pay close attention here, a one-year deal is becoming more and more realistic. A prove-it contract, a shorter-term, higher-risk arrangement that lets Jennings rebuild his value, stay healthy, and then go back to the market next offseason with a clean bill of health and another year of strong production on his resume. Reports are already floating out there that a one-year deal in the $12 to $15 million range is now in the conversation. That's still the biggest contract of his career, but it's a far cry from the multi-year $67 million projection from just a few weeks ago. And $12 to $15 million? The Chiefs can work with that, especially if they're creative about it, especially if they restructure something here, move something around there. Brett Veach has done it before. The man is basically a magician when it comes to NFL cap management. So now you've got a receiver who needs a new home and is willing to come at a reasonable price. And you've got a team that desperately needs a receiver and suddenly has the flexibility to make a move. This is the convergence. This is the perfect storm. But wait, because there's one more piece to this puzzle that makes it all make complete sense. And this is the piece that most people are sleeping on. Chapter 6. The skill nobody talks about. When people talk about Jauan Jennings, they talk about his hands, they talk about his size, they talk about the red zone presence, they talk about the big body that can win contested catches and absorb contact without falling down. But there's one skill that Jennings has that almost nobody outside of serious football circles talks about, and it might actually be the single most valuable thing he brings to any team that signs him. Jauan Jennings might be the best pass-blocking wide receiver in the entire NFL. I know, that sounds weird. We don't normally talk about wide receivers and blocking in the same sentence with that kind of enthusiasm. Blocking is the unglamorous part of football. Blocking is what you do when the cameras aren't watching and the commentators are focused on somebody else. But blocking matters. Blocking changes games. Blocking is the difference between a running play that goes for 3 yards and a running play that goes for 30. And here's why this matters so much, specifically for Kansas City in 2026. The Chiefs just signed Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl MVP running back, a guy who, when given the right blocking, has shown the ability to be one of the most explosive running backs in the entire sport. Kenneth Walker needs lanes. Kenneth Walker needs wide receivers who are willing to get dirty and seal off edge defenders. Kenneth Walker needs exactly what Jennings gives. Think about what that combination looks like. Mahomes under center, Walker in the backfield, and Jennings as one of the wide receivers who is not just a threat in the passing game, but is actively creating running lanes for one of the best backs in football. That's not just a weapon, that's a completely new dimension to the Kansas City offense. That's the kind of multi-layered threat that defensive coordinators have nightmares about. And it makes complete sense when you think about where Jennings came from. Kyle Shanahan's offense in San Francisco is built on the same foundational principles that Andy Reid's offense in Kansas City operates on. Wide zone runs, misdirection, play action, the kind of system where receivers have to understand their role in the running game just as much as the passing game. Jennings already knows how this works. He already speaks the language. The adjustment from Shanahan to Reid isn't some massive culture shock. It's a translation, and the vocabulary is almost identical. That's not an accident. That's a football fit that makes too much sense to ignore. Chapter 7. The Mahomes Effect. Now we get to the part that should make every single NFL free agent sit up and pay attention. Patrick Mahomes. Let me ask you something. How many wide receivers has Patrick Mahomes made look better than they actually are? How many guys have come to Kansas City carrying modest resumes and left looking like legitimate NFL stars? The list is longer than most people remember. Travis Kelce. Obviously, Kelce is a Hall of Famer regardless of Mahomes, but their chemistry made them both better. Tyreek Hill left Kansas City and went to Miami, and you know what happened? The Dolphins paid him an absolutely massive contract. The production didn't quite match the contract. Mahomes elevated Tyreek to a level that even Tyreek alone couldn't fully maintain. Juju Smith-Schuster, a guy who many people had written off completely after his injury-plagued years in Pittsburgh, came to Kansas City and had a resurgent season because of the way Mahomes keeps defenses off balance. This is what playing with Patrick Mahomes does. It makes receivers better. It creates matchups that teams can't solve. It opens windows that shouldn't exist. It turns good players into great ones and great players into legends. Jauan Jennings has never played a single regular season snap with a quarterback of Patrick Mahomes' caliber. Think about that. Everything he's done, the 9 touchdowns, the 975-yard season, the clutch third down conversions, he did all of it with passers who, with all due respect, are nowhere near the level of Mahomes. Brock Purdy is a good quarterback. He's really good, but he is not Patrick Mahomes. Nobody is Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is a different species. So now you take Jauan Jennings' skill set, the sure hands, the big body, the elite blocking, the red zone presence, the clutch gene, and you put him in an offense run by one of the greatest offensive minds in NFL history, in Andy Reid, throwing passes from the greatest quarterback of this generation. That's not a question of whether it works. The only real question is, by how much does he improve? And here's the thing about the one-year deal scenario. If Jennings comes to Kansas City, stays healthy, has the kind of year that this offense can produce, and then hits free agency again next offseason, he's not getting $12 to $15 million a year. He's not getting $22 million. He might be getting 25, 28. The Mahomes effect is real, and it is documented, and it is powerful. For a player who's been waiting his whole career for the right situation, this might be it. Chapter 8. The Receiver Room Problem. Let's be really honest about where Kansas City's receiver room stands right now, because the Kansas faithful deserve the truth. Rashee Rice is talented. We've seen what he can do when everything is clicking. He's a dynamic playmaker who can take over games with his ability.
But 2025 was a rough year. The production wasn't there, the consistency wasn't there, and on top of that, there are questions about whether he might face another suspension at some point. The kind of uncertainty that a team building for a championship run really can't afford. Xavier Worthy is young and fast and electric with the ball in his hands, but he hasn't taken the step that everyone expected him to take. He's still a work in progress. He's still a guy who flashes brilliance without being reliably brilliant, and there's a significant difference between those two things. Tyquan Thornton is back. Thornton can run, Thornton can stretch the field, but he's a specialist. He's a deep threat. He's not somebody you're building your offense around on a down-to-down basis. Jalen Royals is an unknown quantity. He's interesting. He might be good. Nobody really knows yet. So what does this room actually look like against a good defense in a playoff game? What does it look like when the opponent has spent all week game planning around Travis Kelce and Rice and Worthy and has the personnel to handle all of them? It looks vulnerable. It looks like a room that can be schemed against. It looks like a room that needs another legitimate weapon, something that forces a defense to make impossible choices. Jennings solves that. A 6'3" receiver who wins contested catches, leads the league's toughest slot routes on third downs, finishes in the red zone, and blocks at an elite level, doesn't just add another option, he fundamentally changes what defenses have to prepare for. Suddenly, you can't cheat coverage to one side. Suddenly, you can't commit your best cornerback to shutting down one guy because there's another guy on the other side who's going to beat you in different ways. Suddenly, the offense becomes genuinely multi-dimensional in a way it hasn't been since Tyreek Hill was running downfield making everyone look like they were standing still. That's what one signing can do. That's the domino effect. Chapter 9. The history between these sides. Here's something interesting, something worth noting. Kansas City isn't a stranger to Jennings. He's been on their radar. The interest has been documented. Multiple reports have placed the Chiefs in the mix for his services since the very start of free agency. Brett Veach watched Jennings play against the Chiefs. He watched tape. He saw what this guy does on third downs, in the red zone, in the moments when the game is on the line. He knows exactly what kind of player Jennings is. The obstacle was never desire. The obstacle was always money. And now, right now, in late March of 2026, the money conversation is changing. The landscape is shifting. What seemed impossible a few weeks ago is suddenly within reach. There's also something poetic about it from Jennings' perspective. The 49ers didn't offer him what he deserved. The team replaced him with Mike Evans, a great player, but still a replacement, a signal that they were moving on. That chapter is closed. The life Jennings built in San Francisco, the late nights studying film, the brutal training sessions, the games he played through injuries that would have kept lesser men on the sideline, all of that is in the past now. He needs a new chapter. He needs a new city, a new opportunity, a new reason to prove something. And the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that plays big games under big lights, a team that owns January football the way almost no franchise in NFL history has ever owned it, could be exactly the stage he needs. The journey from seventh-round afterthought to Super Bowl weapon. That's a story worth telling. That's a story worth playing for. Chapter 10. The cap space chess match. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. $7 million in cap space? How does this work? How does a team with $7 million in available cap space sign a receiver who's asking for $12 to $15 million a year? This is where the art of NFL roster management gets fascinating. The Chiefs have been here before. Brett Veach has navigated cap situations that looked impossible and found solutions that nobody else saw coming.
This is the same front office that kept this dynasty alive while paying Mahomes, Kelce, and a defense that needed significant investment all at the same time. Several mechanisms exist. Players can restructure deals, taking a lower base salary in exchange for a signing bonus that spreads the cap hit across multiple years. The Chiefs can release players who no longer fit the roster to free up space. They can rework existing contracts to create new flexibility. None of this is magic. All of it requires work, creativity, and a clear vision of what you're building. But the Chiefs front office has demonstrated repeatedly that they have the capability to make it happen when it matters. And here's the thing, the Jennings deal doesn't have to be structured the traditional way. If it's a one-year prove-it deal, the negotiations look completely different than a 3-year guaranteed contract. A 1 year with a relatively modest guaranteed base and significant incentive bonuses tied to health and performance could actually work within the current framework of the Chiefs. The player gets his money if he stays healthy and produces. The team gets protection if the injury history becomes a concern again. Both sides take a calculated risk. Both sides have something to gain. That's a negotiation that can happen. That's a deal that both sides can look at and say, yeah, we can make this work. Chapter 11. The Countdown. Here's where we are right now, in real time as this video drops. Free agency is winding down. The big splash period is over. The teams that needed to fill major holes have either filled them or are pivoting to the draft. The NFL draft is on the horizon. Every day that passes is another day where rosters get more locked in, where the available options get smaller, where the window for making moves like this gets narrower. Jennings needs to make a decision. The market isn't improving. The longer he waits, the more the leverage shifts away from him. At some point, and that point is coming faster than you might think, he'll have to decide between holding out for something that may never materialize or accepting a strong one-year deal that sets him up for the future. The Chiefs need to make a decision too. Every day they spend without addressing the receiver position is another day closer to the draft where they'd feel pressure to spend an early pick on a position that could potentially be solved in free agency right now. Signing Jennings could completely change how Brett Veach approaches the draft. Instead of needing to target a wide receiver with a first or second round pick, Veach could focus on rebuilding the defensive depth that got stripped away this offseason. He could look for value. He could be flexible. Flexibility is power in the NFL. The teams that go into the draft without pressing needs are the teams that land the biggest steals. The teams that desperately need to fill a position early, those are the teams that reach. Those are the teams that make mistakes that haunt them for years. One Jennings signing doesn't just solve an immediate need, it potentially makes the entire Chiefs offseason strategy smarter, more flexible, and more dangerous.
Step all the way back for a second, far back. What is Patrick Mahomes trying to accomplish in 2026? He's coming back from a torn ACL and LCL. He suffered those injuries in December 2025. Everything about his recovery, everything about the timeline, points toward him being ready for training camp and the start of next season. But he's going to be coming back from one of the most significant injuries a quarterback can face. He's going to need weapons around him. He's going to need the ball to come out of his hands quickly. He's going to need receivers who are not just threats in the passing game, but who protect the pocket, who give him room, who allow the offense to function at full speed, even as he rebuilds the confidence and comfort in his knee that only comes with time and reps. Jauan Jennings is exactly that kind of receiver. The elite pass blocking, the short to intermediate route tree, the reliability on third downs, the ability to make catches in traffic without losing possession. This isn't just about what Jennings does for the offense as a weapon. This is about what Jennings does for Patrick Mahomes as a returning quarterback who needs everything around him to be as stable and reliable as possible. Great offensive teams don't get built in one transaction. They get built through a series of smart, connected decisions that all reinforce each other. Kenneth Walker gives you the running game. Travis Kelce gives you the elite tight end weapon. A healthy Rashee Rice gives you the dynamic playmaker. Xavier Worthy gives you the speed threat. And Jauan Jennings,
Jauan Jennings gives you the glue. The guy who does the things that don't show up on highlight reels. The guy who makes everyone around him better. The guy who Mahomes looks at on 3rd and 6 and thinks, I know exactly where this ball is going. I know exactly who is going to catch it. I know exactly what's going to happen next. That certainty, that rock-solid reliability, is worth so much more than a flashy 40 time or an impressive combine number. That's what championship teams are built on. Chapter 13. The Legacy Angle. Let's talk about something that nobody in sports media will bring up because it sounds too soft for football analysis, but is actually incredibly real. Legacy. Jauan Jennings is 28 years old. He is entering what should be the prime years of his career. He has everything it takes to be a significant contributor on a championship-caliber team. He has proven that in the toughest environment, under the toughest circumstances, he delivers. But he's never had a Super Bowl ring. He's never had the kind of moment that defines a career in the public memory. He's been a great player on teams that fell short. He's been a clutch contributor in games that didn't end the way his team needed them to end. Patrick Mahomes has 3 Super Bowl rings. Andy Reid has a Super Bowl ring. The Kansas City Chiefs are built to chase more of them. If Jennings signs with the Kansas City Chiefs and that team goes on a deep playoff run, if he's catching passes in January, making plays in the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl, his entire legacy changes overnight. The 7th-round pick who nobody wanted becomes the veteran wide receiver who came to Kansas City and helped the greatest quarterback of his generation add another championship to his collection. That story, that arc, has a gravitational pull that no spreadsheet can quantify. Athletes feel it. They understand it. The chance to be part of something historic, something lasting, something that gets told for decades, that means something. And right now, in March of 2026, that opportunity exists. The door is open. The timing is aligned. The football reasons and the legacy reasons and the financial reasons are all pointing in the same direction. All somebody has to do is walk through the door. Chapter 14. What has to happen? Here's the simple version of what needs to occur for this to come together. Brett Veach needs to make one creative cat move, restructure something, release something, find the space. He's done it dozens of times. He can do it again. Jauan Jennings needs to accept that the blockbuster multi-year deal isn't coming this offseason. He needs to look at the board, assess his options, and decide that a 1-year prove-it contract with the most iconic franchise in the NFL right now, with a Hall of Fame quarterback, a Hall of Fame coach, and a legitimate shot at another Super Bowl, is the right move for his career, his health, and his long-term earning potential. Those two things happening simultaneously is not a fantasy. It's not a stretch. It's not the kind of wishful thinking that gets talked about in the spring and quietly forgotten by summer. This is a real scenario. This is happening in slow motion right now in NFL front offices and agent conversations and private negotiations that the public never fully sees. The question isn't whether this makes sense. Everything makes sense. The question is whether both sides can get to yes before the window closes. Chapter 15. The Final Picture. Imagine it's September 2026, opening weekend of the NFL season. The Kansas City Chiefs are on the field. Patrick Mahomes is back, healthy, hungry, more motivated than he's ever been after watching the playoffs without him last season. Kenneth Walker is in the backfield with that Super Bowl ring on his finger and something left to prove. Travis Kelce is still finding ways to get open that defy every law of physics and common sense. And lined up wide, jersey number 15, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, is Jauan Jennings, the 7th-round pick, the guy who played through broken ribs, the guy who led his team in touchdowns as even the season fell apart around him. The guy who bet on himself and came to the right place at exactly the right time. The ball snaps, Mahomes drops back, he scans the field. 3rd and 7, big play, defense loaded up against Kelce, against Walker, against the deep threats.
Jauan Jennings runs his route, clean, precise. The cornerback is playing off, respecting his size, respecting the last time they went man-to-man, and Jennings won in contested coverage by sheer physical will. The window opens, Mahomes fires, the ball hangs in the air for a half second that feels like forever. And Jauan Jennings catches it. Of course he catches it. He always catches it. First down, new set of downs. The Kansas City offense keeps moving. That's not a fantasy. That's a completely realistic outcome if the right people make the right decisions in the next few days. This signing is available right now. The pieces are there. The fit is real. The timing is perfect. Jauan Jennings to the Kansas City Chiefs isn't just a rumor. It might be the move that defines this entire offseason. And if you've been paying attention, you saw it coming before everybody else did. Make sure you subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the stories that the mainstream analysts miss. Drop a comment below. Do you think this deal gets done? Do the Chiefs pull the trigger? Or does somebody else swoop in at the last second and steal one of the most underrated free agents on the market? The clock is ticking. The window is open. Watch this space.